Data protection means the protection by all organisations of personal information, whether it relates to employees, citizens, consumers, service users. It shouldn't be seen as a burden on organisations. Good data protection policies and procedures can actually help organisations become more efficient. For example, it will reduce the number of customer complaints that they have, which means that the complaint staff can go on and deal with the more serious complaints. Marketers should care about the data protection regulation because it will have a profound impact on the way they do business. For example, there's the possible changes to the consent rules, which may mean that marketers may have to get opt-in consent for post and telephone marketing. There are also the changes to the rules on profiling, which may make profiling much more difficult, particularly if online identifiers fall within the definition of personal information. There's also the data security breach notification requirements. This will mean that organisations will have to notify individuals and the regulators, such as the ICO, within either 24 or 72 hours of the data security breach occurring. For those members who are data processors, such as outsourced telemarketing bureau, mailing houses, email broadcasters, they will also have direct liability under the regulation, so the Information Commissioner's Office will be able to take enforcement action directly against them. Under the current data protection legislation, the Information Commissioner's Office can only take enforcement action against clients of outsourced service providers. The most important aspect of a data protection regulation for the one-to-one marketing sector is the possible change to the definition of personal information. It's possible that online identifiers could be considered to be personal information under the new regulation. This would mean that cookies would become personal information. It's slightly odd that cookies would become personal information because they don't actually identify a living individual. They just identify the device that the user happens to be using. So, for example, in a shared household, a cookie will be able to tell you that a computer is being used, but it won't be able to tell you who is on that computer. And as we know, many computers, devices are shared between occupants of a household. Consumers like to get targeted advertising, but if they have to give permission to the use of cookies, it's likely that many of them will not give that consent. Organisations won't be able to send out the targeted advertising to consumers, which will mean that consumers may well receive more untargeted email, more advertising that they don't actually want to receive. So the end result of it could be that consumers will get turned off email marketing. The first thing the DMA is advising its members and other organisations to do to become compliant with the new data protection regulation is to make sure that they're compliant with the existing data protection legislation. Secondly, they should use the period now while the text of the regulation is being finalised to audit and review their existing data protection policies and procedures. For example, to find out exactly what personal information they're holding, where it's held. This will put them in good stead because once the regulation is finalised and has completed its passage through legislation, organisations will have 2 years to implement the changes. Now that 2-year period is going to go very quickly and organisations need to make a lot of fundamental changes to their practices and procedures. So if they can use this period of the audit and review to actually work out what they need to change, they will then be in good shape. And once the legislation has completed its passage through Brussels, they will then be able to get on and focus on actually implementing the changes that's needed during the 2 years, rather than wasting time during that 2-year implementation period, carrying out the audit and the review and the preparatory work. Whether the regulation has a positive or negative impact on the UK economy will very much depend on the final text of the regulation. The final text of a regulation needs to balance the interests of consumers and the interests of business. For example, in the case of profiling, if businesses aren't able to use cookies to target their communications to consumers, that will have a huge impact on the online digital economy. Similarly, consumers want to receive targeted information, and cookies and profiling is a very good way of delivering that to them.